Okay, welcome to today's DIGIREAL lunch meeting. We have these lunch meetings every month on the first Thursday of each month, and they are to invite different experts who present on different topics. Last meeting and this meeting are dedicated to virtual humans, and that's in light of our new project that we recently kicked off. But before that, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ekaterina. I am a project manager and producer at Cradle, which is the research and development team of the Breda University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. And we are one of the partners together with Fontis and Mind Labs for the DIGIREAL project, which is a big project. It's been running for quite some years. And our three main focuses are digital humans, digital social, and digital twins. However, as I already informed you, we are celebrating now with these two lunch meetings the new project that we recently kicked off. It's called VHESPER, and our focus will be psychology research for virtual humans. We are doing it together with us, Breda University, University of Bremen, HAWEST, and Humboldt University of Berlin. And last time we had Dennis and Ursula, who are from University of Bremen and Humboldt University in Berlin, who presented what their work is in terms of virtual humans in psychology. And today we have two other speakers. Just briefly about the project, we have three main work packages. One of them is on the establishment of a European Virtual Humans Network. The other one is focused on conducting experimental studies with virtual humans. So yesterday we actually came back from Brussels for the official kickoff with the partners of the project, where we discussed our first ideas of these experimental studies, and we more or less defined the first experiment that we want to do. So this will be very soon starting. And all of that towards the end of the project, which is more towards next year, towards the end of next year, we will also develop some partnerships for research, development, and innovation proposals, such as Cost Action, Horizons, and others. If you are interested, please contact me or my colleague Nick. I'll leave our emails as well, or Igor. We are very open to share more if you want to know. Before I introduce today's speakers, I would like to inform you of the next lunch meeting, which will take place on the 3rd of April, again from 12 until 1 during lunchtime, and it will be focused on digital twins and artificial intelligence for biodiversity. We will have three speakers, one from Fontis, Gerard Schouten, who is a professor on AI and data, and we'll have Sharif Islam and Ian from the Naturalis Biodiversity Center in the Netherlands. They'll tell you more about how they apply these technologies for the topic of biodiversity. So you're welcome to join that, and more information and registration will be shared soon. Now I want to go to today's meeting and tell you a bit about the two presenters. We'll start with Ruben Decoster. He's a researcher at the HAWEST University of Applied Sciences, which is located in Belgium. And we have Kyana van Eijndhoven. With Kyana, we know each other very well. We have been working with Boas and Tilburg for quite some time, not only on the topic of virtual humans, but also on esports and other topics. She's currently doing her postdoc at the Department of Cognitive Science and Artificial Intelligence. But now I would like to really give the stage to them. So starting with Ruben. Ruben, you can go for it and share your screen.
Okay. So I think my screen should be shared. If not, please tell me.
I think he had some problems with Zoom earlier, so I think his Zoom crashed again, but he's back. Are you back, Ruben?
I'm back, yeah.
Okay, you crashed, right?
I crashed again, apparently. Yeah, so I hope that's the last time today that I'm crashing. But hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here to talk about Avatar. I'm Ruben Decoster. So, as Katrina mentioned, I'm researcher at West University of Applied Sciences. And yeah, today I really want to talk about Avatar. Uh, First, to continue about myself, I'm a researcher. I studied industrial psychology, and I'm just really interested in the interplay between human work and play. And I think this project really brings all those things together. When I was preparing the presentation, I was thinking about what are the main questions that are really driving this presentation. And these are questions I'll try to answer in my way, but that's just one way. So there are also questions for you. And I'm really curious as well to find out how you look towards these questions. The first one is how realistic can we can we have human virtual human interactions? How realistic do they feel? What are the current limitations? And also, what's the impact of the modalities? Like if it's text only, audio, and also video with an avatar, what are the differences? And the other question that's really pertinent for Avatar is, can we leverage those type of interactions to improve how job-specific conversational skills are trained currently? Uh, are there opportunities there, things we need to consider, and so on? So keep that in mind. But before we dive deeper, I'll just take a step back and like give a very short introduction about West and the research teams that are participating in this project. So West, as Katrina mentioned, is active in Belgium, mostly situated in West Flanders, Bruges. If you've ever been, it's very nice. Kortrijk, Oudenaarde, also very nice. But we have over 10,000 students, with plus 30 bachelor degrees and so on. And we also have a very strong research division where we really focus on interdisciplinary research, very practical research in collaboration with other organizations and so on. For Avatar, there are two research teams that work together, DIA Research and Mensenmaat, and they both have complementary expertise for Avatar, and I'll explain why. So DIA Research, Digital Arts and Entertainment, is very known a degree in Belgium and also worldwide. It's a 3-year degree with 6 specializations. As you can see on the slide, major visual effects, 3D animation, and so on. And they also do conduct research on game and film technology, making sure they're up to date with the newest trends and just experimenting in general. So in terms of technical knowledge and expertise, about how to create games and tools. They're very quite knowledgeable. And then you have Mensenmaat. This is the research group that I'm a part of. It's mostly a group of social scientists connected to degrees such as applied psychology, social work, and so on. So the research usually focuses on with organizations with social sectors trying to tackle societal problems that are on that more situated in that sector. So those two groups work really well together in the sense that we have the technical expertise, but also the expertise in terms of psychological knowledge and also how to create educational tools. So Avatar, I haven't really told yet what it is. So I'm going to teach you a little bit further and just go with space 1 and 2, because that was the start of our quest, really. That started in 2019, where we were looking for a new learning method for role-playing simulations using virtual humans and AI. For example, our students at the Bachelor of Applied Psychology, we know that therapy and therapeutic skills they are quite important to help the patient, to increase or improve patient outcomes. So communication skills are essential. And one of the ways that they are often trained are through role-playing exercises where two students sit before each other and start talking, where one student is the patient or the client, for example, and the other is trying to conduct a psychological intake conversation. However, that can be quite challenging. For example, students need to be motivated, but they also need to have the live experience to inhabit certain roles, certain encounters to make a really convincing case. At the same time, it's also tough to scale. Um, like if you have several groups of students doing a role-playing exercise, a teacher can only follow one at a time. So not everybody is able to get feedback personalized. So there are several disadvantages to this approach. And we were wondering, that this was in 2019, can we offer students a virtual learning environment where students can safely practice their communication skills and then practice it with virtual humans, which would allow us to, yeah, think about that it's more scalable. The persona, the virtual human would have more experience through the prompt it's given, and it would be much more personalized. So this is something that we worked on in 2019. We started with the first project, and yeah, we worked really hard on it, had a lot of conversations. We made transcripts of possible intake conversations, but we quickly noticed there were technological limitations. It was very time consuming to create one persona, and it was really not scalable. Students used it and they found it useful, but it was also frustrating to use. You had to wait a long time. The answers didn't really always make sense, and so on. So we shelved it for the moment. As we say in Dutch, we put it in the fridge for a time to see how it evolves. And then in 2021, 22, we noticed there was with generative AI a new boom, renewed momentum, and we asked for with West for a project for 6 months just to check, is this more feasible now? Can we make it more scalable and so on? So we tested it and we just made in the limited time that we have a proof of concept. And I'll try to play a short part of it. As a first example, I cut it
Ruben, the
off this.
sound was not
Yeah,
working, by the way.
the
So,
sound was not working.
yeah, it
Okay,
was not working.
good to know. I'll make sure for next time it works. If the next video doesn't work, please let me know. So what you heard was a meta-human. What you saw was a meta-human. And so I ask a question and we give a response back. I'll just do the very start so you can hear that at least.
Ja, ik begrijp het. Alles is duidelijk.
Oké, Tommy. Kan je me vertellen waarom je vandaag naar hier gekomen bent?
Ik ben hier omdat ik moeite heb om de gedragsproblemen van mijn zoon te begrijpen.
Okay, so I assume the audio or the sound was working now.
Yes, yeah.
You heard a short fragment. You also notice it's the metahuman, but it had to run locally so we could test it with students. And at the same time, you could also hear notice there was quite a lot of latency. But we did a lot of tests with students, and the experience was pretty positive. But with the remarks that, for example, the latency, but also the fact that it was difficult to get into a deeper conversation with the virtual human. After a while, they would start to notice that the virtual human was really problem focused and would get back to the same topics on and on. But was successful as a prototype, as a proof of concept, and we were able to continue, create a new research proposal for Avatalk, and that when we worked with Avatalk, we broadened our perspective. It's not just about helping students practicing their consultation skills, but more broader, as in the societal need for lifelong learning and interpersonal skills keeps on increasing. I think previous year was also the European Year of the Skills. So it keeps gaining importance. And we notice that current learning methods for those more interpersonal skills, that there are some limitations inherent to them. As in the cost, you can think human or transportation, time, and so on. But there's often also a gap in transferring the learnings to actual workplace behavior. I think, for example, a leadership course where for a few days you have a very intensive course and then afterwards you go back to work. Maybe the first month you will retain some things, but after a while it drops off. So there should be some opportunities there. And at the same time, personalization is limited because if you're training a group of 8 to 10 to 15 people, you can't give everyone the same amount of attention and energy. So there's some loss of personalization there. So the target for Avatalk was really to create an additional learning method to practice those communication skills. And we don't see them as replacing traditional role-playing exercise, but as something that can be added onto it or supplement them to make sure, for example, if you have that for 1 week training course, afterwards you can still practice those skills at your leisure when you want and where you want. So we were able to get a research grant for this from TITRA. It's offered by Vlaio. It's an organization in Flanders that supports practice-oriented research, especially at Flemish university colleges. It's for 2 years, and in order to do this, you have to work together with organizations to make sure that the output, the things that we do, is translatable for organizations, that they can work with it, that there's enough knowledge transfer. I'll quickly go through the sectors that are represented. For example, healthcare services. We also have organizations in HR and also tech providers who would be able to leverage the learnings that we have to help the organizations that have joined to implement our learnings. So we have a lot of several hospitals that are joining, also a help desk support for people who are struggling. And we also have services, for example, police department at Ostend, and also the public service broadcaster VRT in Flanders. And then HR, we have several HR organizations that were really interested in the possibilities to practice those skills in a different manner. And then tech providers that I noted earlier. Those organizations, we keep in contact with them. We have a lot of service, but also conduct qualitative interviews to look at what are their needs, how do they currently conduct those type of trainings, and so on. So, for example, we collected the information about what type of conversations would be most interesting to practice. And two came out of this. Two were selected based on the conversations. First one were performance reviews. So all types of conversations focused on providing feedback or enabling growth in the other person. This could be from supervisor to employee or employee to employee, and so on. This was very popular across the different sectors, and also conflict management was a really important one. For example, in a hospital, you have the emergency room, and people can enter based on severity, for example, and not everybody is always very happy with that, and there may be some complaints, there may be some aggressiveness arising. So at those moments in time, the nurses or the people present have to be able to de-escalate those situations. And you can do that in a role-playing exercise, but you could also, you can do those in role-playing exercise, but they require time and energy. But if you can do it in a more safe environment and test and practice multiple times, when you want, where you want, that really has some advantages. So now I want to talk about the foundational elements to make this possible. There are two parts. It's the tool in which it's embedded, the educational implementation, but also how the virtual human can be formed. And for Avatar, the purpose was really not just to make one thing, but to look at what the different options are and make a balance of what's the drawbacks, what are the strengths of different large language models, and so on. So for a large language model, the persona needs to be authentic and flexible. For example, we notice that sometimes they can be quite dry or abstract when giving examples. And at the same time, we don't want the persona to keep hammering on the same subject, but to have variety in there. We want a persona to be easy to create for the learning designers, but at the same time, we're looking for some evidence-based personas. So, for example, we work with the Big Five theory for the personality to make sure we can have a variety in there. At one time, you can be talking to someone that's very agreeable. At another time, the persona or the virtual human would be very disagreeable and it would be much more difficult to get to an understanding. And we also work with values from the basic values of Schwartz. Both are very popular theories that we're experimenting with. How can we make sure the persona adheres to those and that we can create a more flexible persona? We have an internal testing tool that we use to test multiple models, be it closed source or models with open weights like DeepSeek, Llama, and so on. So we test those, we collect feedback, and we refine the prompts to make sure the persona or the virtual human functions the way we want it. So that's about LLMs. Then we have the avatar, and I'll show a short example. I won't be able to do it completely to take into account the time. But here we also wanted to look at the multiple options. The metahumans are with Unreal Engine, very popular option, and the one we're probably going to continue with. But at the same time, Gaussian splitting, a specific rendering technique, also has very interesting results. And we're always looking at, for example, realism and emotional expression. So I'll give a short example of a demo that I made with toys. So the idea is to have a conversation that is psychological intake with Stephanie in this example to talk about her missed promotion and her job.
Hello, Ruben. Nice to meet you too. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Do you know what the conversation of today is about?
I'm not entirely sure, Ruben, but I assume it's about my current situation and challenges I'm facing. Perhaps we can discuss some of the issues I've been dealing with at work.
I've heard that work has been hard.
Yes, that's correct, Ruben. Work has been tough lately. I've been feeling undervalued and uncertain about my role. It's been affecting my confidence and overall well-being.
Just because I'm...
Yeah, so that's all I'm able to share right now because of the timing. But you notice it seems quite lifelike, but at the same time, there are some tells that give you the feeling that it's. I sometimes describe it as almost a tortured human that's being forced to speak. The eyebrows go certain directions, and certainly in this case, the voice, the tempo, for example, is a bit too fast. So while really impressive, there are some terms, certainly in terms of emotional expression, there are really big limitations. So, for example, crying or being very happy or being quite sad, those are emotions that are really difficult to express currently. But in terms of realism, this looks quite realistic. So yeah, it's always always about looking at the trade-offs and what we can use it for. So that's the avatar. That's just one option that I found really interesting. ByteDance also released a research paper with even better results, but they haven't released anything yet. So I wasn't really able to show it. in terms of voice, this is also a really important part because if you're talking about having complaints and handling with complaints, you sometimes need a certain amount of anger or frustration that you can notice when listening. And when it comes to voice, I'll just show you an example of Sesame. The demo only released a week ago, if I'm not mistaken, and yeah, I was quite impressed. So I'll give you a short. I'll let you hear it.
Hello, Stephanie. How are you feeling today?
Honestly, pretty lost. Like driving down a road with no streetlights and the fog is rolling in. You know when you think you're headed somewhere, but then you can't even remember what place you're trying to get to? That's me right now.
Yeah, are you talking about your job and the promotion?
Yeah, you guessed it. I mean, I put in the time, you know, years and long hours. Thought I was doing all the right things.
I
But
can, yeah, I can tell you're feeling quite disappointed.
disappointed, that's a gentle way to put it. More like gutted. Like my insides were hollowed out and they forgot to put anything back in.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll stop it right there. So what you notice here is the amount of emotional expressiveness is much richer. You can hear some laughter, you hear some pauses. You can also notice more emotion when feeling sad or talking about something that hurts. So this is a really interesting approach from Sesame. Um, they haven't released it yet, but it should be released in Apache 2.0, and they're thinking about releasing it in 20 languages. So I'm really curious about testing this more. Um, and one big hope throughout the whole of Avatalk has been, please let it also be in Dutch. That's a very big challenge currently to find a good speech model that also works in Dutch. And if possible, Flemish, but I won't get my hopes too high on that part. Yep. So that's in
Hello,
terms of voice. In terms of learning environment, I'll go through these quite quickly to take into account timing. So a very important part is evaluating the conversations. So as a learner, you need feedback. You need to know, were the things that I said correct? Was the approach taken correct? Did I end the conversation in the right way, and so on? That is really important and should be based on clear rubrics so learners know where am I standing in terms of skill and expertise. The question for Uptalk as well is, can we automate this? Can we have, for example, a reasoning model, analyze a transcript, analyze the way some parts were said, and is that accurate enough to count as worthwhile feedback? So with Avatalk, we're going to work together with all the organizations mentioned earlier to compare the automatically generated feedback and the feedback that experts would create or write based on the transcript to find out, can we get close enough, or is there a certain gap, or is it even better? That's definitely still a question. So here, for example, you see a possible debrief. So a learner would be able to see what were my strengths, what are growth areas, and get a certain analysis of the conversation. This is just a prototype example. At the same time, you also want personalization. You want the learner not to have conversations that are too difficult. For example, a performance review with a very skeptical employee, but more with someone that's more agreeable and open for change and so on. So you have variety in there, but I also want to look at making the cases contextualized to the company or sector. For example, in healthcare or in a hospital, it's much different than more in an HR setting. Then also scaffolding, we want to make sure that we don't throw users in the deep end and have a conversation and you'll see how it goes, but also to allow to have mini conversations, like for example, just start with introducing the conversation, then try to discuss some themes, and then in another conversation, try finishing the performance review. Like try to tie up all loose ends. For example, it doesn't have to be just the specific parts of a conversation, but also just work in text where you have a lot of time to think about what you want to say. Then you can move up to audio, where you have more pressure, where you have to answer quicker or faster. And then with video, you also have that added input where you are reacting to a person. So those make practicing a bit harder, but are easy, help you to increase in your skill. And lastly, we also have the want to make sure that the learning designers are able to customize the virtual humans, for example, in terms of personality, the interaction style, but also certain themes that are discussed that would be more relevant in a certain organization than in another. This is something in the 2 years that we're working on this project that will be iteratively testing and refining with the content experts from the organization, but also from people at VHESPER and other researchers and so on. We definitely want to check out the authenticity, how well the learning environment works in terms of user experience. And we also test it on the target group, so people that are working at the organizations, not necessarily content experts, and with students who are actively learning those skills for their degree. So that brings it all back to those main questions, like how realistic are those interactions currently? And there's some nice progress, but bringing it all together can be quite difficult. And the more specific you go, like in terms of language, the more barriers you meet. And in terms of can we leverage this to improve how job-specific conversational skills are learned, even if the current state of technology just stops here, even then it would be really interesting and really worthwhile to invest in this type of learning, because there's a lot of potential here. So I want to thank you for your attention. Feel free to get in touch. You can see my email address. And also, I just want to note, English is my first language. So if I made some mistakes here and there, feel free to ask for some clarification, and I'll be glad to do so.
Thank you, Ruben. So a round of virtual applause for Ruben. Thank you so much. I would like to ask the audience to save your questions. If there are such questions, please post them in the chat for now. And after Kyana finishes with the presentation, we'll have a round of Q&A. Ruben, if I may ask you, could you please also put your email address in the chat for Kyana the same? Now Kyana is starting to share her screen. So Kyana, go for it.
Sorry, I tried to unmute myself and it didn't work, but you should all hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I would like to talk today a little bit about the research I'm doing, and that is about nonverbal mimicry in virtual human and human interaction. So I'm currently doing a postdoc at Tilburg University together with Dr. Pieter Spronk. And the main research topic of this whole project is what is the role of nonverbal mimicry in human and virtual human interaction. And there's two concepts that I would like to clarify before I move on. First of all, I mean, I don't necessarily have to clarify this because I think everybody does something more or less with virtual humans. But just for the sake of clarifying, so I consider virtual humans to be digital representations of humans that displays human resemblance in looks, feels, and behavior. And in my work, I will mainly focus also on virtual human agents. So the virtual humans that are driven by the models, the algorithms, and not necessarily the virtual human avatars that are driven by other humans, for example, when you're playing a video game. The other concept was nonverbal mimicry, which then refers to the spontaneous and immediate imitation of others' physical behavior during social interaction. And that can serve both an informative role and a communicative role. Sometimes nonverbal mimicry is confused with interactional synchrony. But for nonverbal mimicry, there is an initiator, like a mimicee, and a responder or a mimicker, whose imitation has to match the mimicee's nonverbal behavior usually within a short time window that's defined as 3 to 5 seconds, but it can be different depending on the study. Oh, I went too far. Yeah, so previous reviews on mimicry have incorporated this review structure, this conceptual model that you can see here, and it represents different ways in which humans can be affected by mimicry. And so according to this model, the occurrence of mimicry is affected by both individual and situational factors that can lead to more mimicry, such as facilitator, like intention to affiliate, or to mimic less, called inhibitors, such as the intention to disaffiliate. This model also describes the impact that mimicry has on the individual, for example, on individual purchasing intentions, or the relationship with the interaction partner, so the social consequence, for example, empathy. And so what we've seen in recent years, and what Ruben also mentioned, is that there have been a lot of advancements in different fields. And some of these advancements are actually very relevant to if we want to implement nonverbal mimicry within virtual human technology. So for virtual human to be able to implement mimicry, there is the signal detection. So if they want to mimic the human, then they should be able to detect some sort of nonverbal signal. But they should also then be able to imitate this detected signal. And these both relate to, one relates to the field of social signal processing, for example, the other to the field of computer graphics, and both there have been major advancements. And because of these advancements, we thought it would be good to have a recent review of empirical studies that incorporate these state-of-the-art technologies. So that brings me to the theory part of my project. I will start with a scoping review. I will focus on, like I said, empirical findings on nonverbal mimicry that's observed during human and virtual human interactions. And this will be a collaboration together with Ethel, who I think is also here in the meeting, and also Peter Spronk. And the goals, of course, are then to provide an overview of the latest research and to also, thinking back of this model that I showed you, get insights on the facilitators and inhibitors, as well as individual and social consequences. I will relatively quickly go through the methods so that we can spend a little bit more time on the results or the findings, the preliminary findings. As with any review, I defined some eligibility criteria on which papers or which articles to include in my review and which to exclude. I also defined search terms, and they were divided in 3 categories. I wanted to look for literature that involved some sort of reference to virtual humans, that also looked at different nonverbal signals like facial, emotional, etc. And I also wanted to include this specific behavior, the behavior of mimicry. And with these keywords, I went into the article selection process, and I entered all these keywords into the databases that you can see on top here. I found a whole bunch of papers that could be relevant. Then, of course, I went through all the appropriate screening steps. I ended up with 90 articles that got into the full screening. And then together with Ethel, I decided that 21 of those were actually relevant for our eligibility criteria. But we are still conducting a back search. So we're going through the references of these included 21 studies to see if there is some more literature to include. But yeah, we went through all the steps, and so what's coming next is based on these 21 papers, but these are, like I said, preliminary findings. So first, let's talk a bit more about the kinds of studies that we've included. We've seen studies that looked at different forms of nonverbal mimicry. So some studies mostly looked at mimicry within the head region, like head movement or facial expressions. And there was also, less studies that looked at nonverbal mimicry that relates to the rest of the body. So not necessarily the head, but everything below. Like, for example, you can look at posture, and then one study also looked at a gesture, pointing gesture. Then these studies also had different ways of displaying virtual humans. So with regards to dimensionality, a lot of studies were 2D representations of virtual humans, and only one was displayed in a 3D environment. Then there was also different hardware that was used. Mostly it was some sort of screen, computer screen. One case was a phone screen, one case was a projection on the wall, and like related to the 3D dimensionality, one was a VR headset. And there was also different levels of embodiment within the research. Some only showed the head and up, others included the neck and the shoulders. And then other studies included the upper body, which was mostly a virtual human seated behind a table, so you couldn't see the full body, but just the upper body. And in one case, there was research on mimicry with a full body, a virtual human. Then there was also a different interaction context. Most of them was just that there was a conversation between a human and a virtual human with some general prompt like, how's the weather? Where do you want to go on holiday? In some cases, there was gameplay. They played some games with each other. In some cases, the virtual human and the human were telling each other stories. There was some joint entertainment going on, like listening to music, watching funny videos together. And then there was one case with a sales context and one with a job interview context. Then on to, so how did they actually try to detect nonverbal signals and relate that to the virtual human? Well, they mostly used cameras as their hardware. So there was some sort of webcam that recorded the human that they interacted with. In some cases, there were motion tracking systems that also can include an internal camera, but motion tracking system could also be just sensors. And then there was one case with eye tracking and one case where they used a force plate to determine posture. There was also different processes for the software that they used for nonverbal signal detection. So that was roughly divided per the region that they were interested in, so either the head or the body. And for the head, there were different toolboxes mentioned, like live-link phase, social signal interpretation, etc. And they all employed some sort of algorithm that was able to find facial landmarks or important spots in the face or action units with an algorithm, machine learning algorithms such as SVM or deep learning algorithms such as convolutional neural networks. If they also looked at emotions because of emotional mimicry, then they deployed some other algorithms such as EmoFan or Emotion API, but those are all machine learning and deep learning algorithms. When it comes to the body, they use different toolboxes. They had eyes, XMI, for example, or kinetic space. If they relied on videos, then they first, before quantifying the movement, needed to map the video frames using techniques such as grayscale mapping that, for example, can indicate the distance to the camera based on the color. And then there's also motion history image, which is able to capture the motion between different video frames. And then the next step would be how to quantify the movement, and there's different ways of doing that. I cannot possibly go into them all, but some that were mentioned were body movement energy and the center of pressure. Then when it comes to nonverbal signal imitation, again, I was able to identify roughly three different categories. So one category on the left was animations based on predefined values for the virtual humans' bodily landmarks. So they were predefined animations. There was also data-driven approaches with animations that were based on target values for virtual humans, and they were computed with some sort of generative models. And the third thing I saw is that there was some direct landmark mapping, so a one-to-one mapped animation of what the human is doing, but it occurs at a delay to feign the mimicry. And they had mentions of different kinds of human avatars that could do these different approaches. And then the rest of the preliminary findings that I will discuss will be in relation to the model. And I will start with the facilitators and the inhibitors. And well, there is a lot to say, and I can't go over it all, but I can mention some of these. So, for example, I do differentiate between was it the humans that mimic the virtual humans, or was it the virtual humans mimicking the humans when I present these results to you? So when it comes to humans mimicking virtual humans, we saw that when the mimickers were female, and this is related to facial expressions, there was actually more mimicry of facial expressions than when the mimickers were male. It was also interesting that we saw that positive facial expressions, as well as disgust, elicited more mimicry of those facial expressions, as when compared to negative facial expressions, minus disgust, of course. But then another study also said that, well, if we compare positive and negative facial expressions and mimicry based on those to neutral facial expressions, then there is more mimicry for positive and negative facial expressions. There was also a finding that relates to emotion recognition, for example. So this was quite surprising. So when a human has confidence in the emotion they think to recognize of the virtual human, they actually mimic less. And when there's diffidence, they would mimic more. Yeah, there was a lot of results for humans mimicking virtual humans in terms of facilitators and inhibitors. But I also want to move on to the other parts. So, for example, there were also some individual consequences of virtual humans mimicking humans in this case. We saw it in 3 different forms of mimicry. So there were some results with regards to smile or laughter, head gaze, as well as upper body mimicry. And some of the consequences that we found were that there was that these researchers found, not me, were that there was a positive relationship between mimicry and smiling. So when there was smiling mimicry, the individual would smile more, and it would also, for example, rate amusement higher. But they would also find music less original. And when it comes to head gaze, for example, and this was also the case for actually the smile mimicry, there was a negative relationship to demotivation. So when there was mimicry, the humans would feel less demotivated, which great. And there was also different individual consequences that were actually not consequences because it didn't find any effect. For example, with regards to mood, intrinsic motivation, and perceived stress. Then on to social consequences of humans mimicking virtual humans specifically. Actually, there was only one study, and they looked at mimicry of facial expressions of sadness or happiness. They didn't find any effect for social consequences of, for example, different kinds of empathy or pro-social indicators. But what they did find is that when there was mimicry of sadness in facial expressions, there would be significantly higher ratings of affective and associative empathy. Then there's also a lot of actually social consequences for virtual humans that mimic humans. Yeah, due to the time, I can again not go over them all. So for example, there was the credibility of nonverbal behavior. So there was higher credibility of nonverbal behavior when I think the 7 basic emotions were mimicked of the humans. Here's some more social consequences. So they were found like in terms of smile, facial expressions, emotion, head gaze, upper body. So very, very wide range. I'm sorry, I hope you can't hear the builders around. Yes, and so we have a lot of things to look into, and like I said, this is a work in progress. These results are preliminary, so I will definitely deep dive into this. But for now, I think one thing that I noticed was that there was limited research in different regards. For example, when it comes to looking at nonverbal mimicry with full body virtual humans, but also virtual humans in VR. Then when it comes to nonverbal signal imitation, there weren't too many that looked into the animation based on data-driven approaches. And I think that is where some advancements have been made with generative models. So that would be interesting for future research. And in terms of the findings, we also saw that there weren't really facilitators or inhibitors for virtual humans mimicking the humans, and then no individual consequences for the human mimicking the virtual human, and very limited social consequences as well. Another thing that I noticed is that within mimicry, they also looked at differences. For example, they looked at mimicry that is mirror-wise. So for example, let's assume these are 2 heads, that they would move like this, or mimicry that's anatomical. So when one moves one way and the other head moves that way. So they had different findings. I think the virtual human that did mirror-wise mimicry was rated as more positive. Also, they looked at positively and negatively biased mimicry. So positively biased, for example, nodding, whereas negatively biased would be like crossing your arms and more closed-off body language. And there was also different findings for that. So that's something to take into account when you do mimicry research. And then the final thing I noticed was gender differences. So for example, some research found that female virtual humans were perceived more positively by both men and women, but also that women were more positive towards virtual humans that were mimicking them than the men. So overall, the current review...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but maybe it's good to go into the discussion because we have only 4 minutes left before we need to end the meeting.
Yeah,
So,
I'm almost done.
Yeah.
So the current review can expand on the model that I showed you to the domain of nonverbal mimicry in human and virtual human interaction. With this review, I also want to inform researchers and developers of virtual humans of the different approaches that are being taken. And so this review is not only highlighting the empirically studied advancements and methodologies that concern virtual humans, but it may also serve as a starting point for future studies that are aimed at refining these interactions through nonverbal mimicry. And these are my questions.
Thanks, Kyana. A round of virtual applause for you as well. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, to Ruben as well. Now, because we have only 3 minutes left, I would really like to go into some interesting questions from the audience. I already see one in the chat, and maybe, Kyana, you can read it. It's from my colleague Treshi. Treshi, do you want to speak up?
Yeah, I think thanks very much for both presentations. I think you sort of addressed my question towards the end, but I was curious as to whether mimicry in any way also influenced social perceptions. And I think that might link to some of the points Ruben covered, where if you trust somebody more or you mimicry kind of reinforces likability, then that might be applicable when virtual humans are used in, say, training contexts, for instance. I was just wondering if mimicry in any way influenced other aspects of perception as well.
I can't really give you an answer to that, because I need to see all of the results. But I do believe that different kinds of mimicry can have different influences on social perceptions. But like I said, that might be very related to who is mimicking. Is it a man or a woman? And how is the mimicry executed? Like, is it mirror-wise or anatomical? So yeah, I don't know for sure, but I can get back to you once I have written this review.
So, and thank you, that's helpful.
There is also a question from Dennis. If you could share the reference for the review. So yeah, maybe Kyana, you can answer that in the chat, I believe. Is there anyone who would like to speak up? Is there another question? If you can also just raise your hand, or if you cannot speak up, you can also write in the chat. But if there is not, we record these sessions. So if you have a colleague who missed the day, you can consult the YouTube playlist that I linked in the meeting. And Kyana, if you may leave your email address if you want, of course, in the chat. So please do that so people can reach out to you if they have other questions. Yeah, and if there is anything, Kyana will share some info with me, Ruben, as well. So if you need, I can also distribute. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. We were a bit short with the questions, but Kyana and Ruben both left their emails, so feel free to reach out. I also left mine and Nick's emails for the VHESPER project, and we are looking forward to welcoming you again in April, on the 3rd of April, for the virtual human for the lunch meeting on biodiversity. Thank you.